the problem that they have is, with Ajabo right now.
Well, let's dive deeper into these injuries with Dr. Scott Adams.
Injury Report is brought to you by Orthopedic Associates of Central Maryland. In pain? Contact the experts at Orthopedic Associates of Central Maryland at mdbonedocs.com. Care this good feels good to the bone. Injury Report.
Doc, let's get right to it. Lamar Jackson, it was reported that he has a sprained PCL, and the timeline given this, according to Adam Schefter, 1 to 3 weeks. Is that a realistic time frame for him?
It can be. First, I think it's important to point out what this is not, since we're so used to talking about ACL injuries, and even though the ACL and the PCL sound similar and are in a similar part of the knee, they are very different injuries. So when we talk about an ACL injury, that's arguably the most dreaded conversation in sports, but a PCL injury behaves a lot different. So when someone does have a PCL injury, first of all, a lot of these can be treated without surgery. Two, the recovery time is often not nearly as long. And while I think 1 to 2 and even to 3 weeks is on the shorter side of what I would expect, especially for the type of runner that Lamar is, it is definitely an injury that can recover at a much quicker pace and one that will allow him to get back. So when they say it's not a season-ending injury, I definitely believe that, but I have a feeling it's going to be on the longer side of the timeline that they gave.
Doc, how do you hurt a PCL?
Yeah, there are a couple different ways, and it's a common injury in football. A lot of times it is falling on a flexed knee. Another time, for those of us that aren't NFL players, we see this in car accidents. If the knee hits the dashboard, it sort of simulates a flexed knee. But oftentimes it is if someone falls on their knee and it's sort of either hyperflexed or just flexed partly and it's an uncomfortable landing. But that's the most common thing. And so usually when we see that as their mechanism, one of the things we do immediately think of is a PCL injury.
Now, Doc, let me ask you about J.K. Dobbins, because I was reading where Leanne Curl did the surgery. They went in there to clean up. And, the stuff that they saw in the MRI when she went in, there was a lot more scar tissue, than they anticipated. Now, taking out more of the scar tissue and stuff, how is that going to affect him? So the knee is going to be able to move much more freely?
Sure. I mean, I think this can be one of a couple of things. First, we know in theory that the ACL graft was okay due to the recovery timeline. And so the most important thing when someone re-injures a knee after an ACL reconstruction is, one, is the knee stable? And you can usually tell that by physical exam. And two, is the graft injured at all? And when someone says there's scar tissue, that's usually not code for there's an injury to the graft. And if there was, then it would be a much longer recovery. So what that tells us is either there is simply some scar tissue that can form around any joint after an injury, and especially after surgery. Now, I still also wonder, because he had a meniscus issue, if some of this was cleaning up actually some of the meniscus that either retore or did not heal in the first place. But cleaning up scar tissue is a relatively benign thing. It can only help as long as it doesn't lead to any new scar tissue forming. So in theory, it should allow him to get good mobility of the knee, and there's probably no better benefit than to be able to look at the ACL graft and say that that is okay.
He's Dr. Scott Adams, joins us each week. And, Doc, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Doc.
We are an hour, 20 minutes away from kickoff. Ravens, Steelers in Pittsburgh. When we get back, climbing the depth chart, Ravens got back.